Hello, welcome back to FD54, the second half of the instructions for the sewing bag assembly. Today what we're going to do is we're going to go over the front half of the bag, which includes the assembly for the L-square carrier, the buttons, the 1 inch web with the Velcro loop and hook, and then the top stitching for the top of the bag. We'll get started with the L-square carrier, and that would be this piece here. You're going to fold the short sides under twice, 1.5 inches, and then 1.5 inches. We'll top stitch with 2 rows of top stitching. Remember, on your top stitching, you want to line up the second row with the first. Clip your threads. Once you've done your top stitching, you're ready to put it onto the bag. The front of the bag has notches on the bottom here, and it has drill marks here. You're going to align the carrier in between those notches and then turn this top part 1/2 inch, and then we'll top stitch that to the front of the bag. You do want to back tack. You'd start your second row of top stitching below the first, lining up your foot along the edge here. When you're done with this section, this is the section where you want to double check your button placements. You'll take the front flap that we constructed last time, and you're going to match it to the L-square, or the front where the L-square carrier is, and you're going to see that your drill marks are in between the loops here for your buttons. If they're off, this is the time where you can remark them and make sure that they're in the middle of the carrier and they're centered in your loop. After you've double checked your button placement, now it's time to sew on the buttons. You can do this to get it started. You're going to fold the fabric, put it through one side, but fold your fabric up. Once you do this first section, you get the button on there. You don't want to pull it too tight, because a lot of times when a button is sewn on too tight, that's when it'll pop off the shirt, because you're not giving it enough room to for the loop to rest around the button. This is when you can use a spacer, and you'll slide it underneath. You can use the spacer. You'll slide it underneath. And then you can finish sewing on your button. You want to run couple strands. So you'll go at least 3 to 4 times per hole. And then once you've done that, what you'll do is you'll wrap around the threads so that the threads that are going through the buttonhole are bound by threads, more threads, so your button is secure. You're going to go back underneath and then make a knot and secure your button. If you don't have a spacer, you can fold the fabric up and you can use either a pin or a needle. And then when you're finished sewing the button on, you pull the needle out. Make sure that your button is not sewn on too tightly. Wrap your threads around, go back under, make your knot. Once you've gotten 2 buttons sewn on, the next step is to sew on the Velcro for your web. So you would take your 7-inch, 1 by 7-inch web, and you'll have your loop and hook Velcro squares. You're going to fold one of the ends of the Velcro web about 1 inch, and then we'll set the Velcro hook on top of it. You want to set the Velcro hook 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the fold. You do not want it right onto the fold. You want to set it back so you have room for your thumb to grab. You can sew this with the hook facing up. You want to sew around all 4 edges of the Velcro. Once that is done, you're going to take it over to the front panel where there's notches here and drills. This is where we're going to set our strap and our Velcro. What we're going to do is set the strap in between the 2 notches and then double check the placement for the Velcro. And as you can see, we're a little off. What we'll do is we'll lay the strap down. We can mark this with a pencil, and you want to put 2 dots at the end of your Velcro here. These 2 dots will let us know where our new placement is for our Velcro loop. So we'll set the loop there. So around all 4 sides of our Velcro, now we'll stay stitch the strap add our notches. Once we've completed this section, the next section to finish the top off would be to turn the top edge twice by a 1/2 inch. So you're going to turn this top edge, and you can press this also. So you'll turn this a 1/2 inch, and then we'll turn it again. And again, this is where we're going to sew it down with 2 rows of top stitching. The second row you can flip the front of the piece over and sew from the right side, lining it up on the edge. Now you've finished the front section of the bag. So far we have the front finished, and then we have the piece that is the flap and the bag. To join these 2 pieces, we're going to need a side panel. And we use a special seam on the bottom of the side panel, which is called a flat felled seam. This is sewn by taking your 2 panel pieces and matching up the ends. So you'll match the ends between the notches here. So you're going to set one end of the side panel, line it up with these 2 notches, and match the other end with the other side of the notches. I'm going to sew a seam down the center of this. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to roll this until it's flat and it covers the raw edges. So you won't see any raw edges on either side. And then I will top stitch along this fold. This is our flat felled seam, and it joins the bottom seam on the side panels of our shoulder bag. Once we've done this, we're ready to assemble the main pieces to our side seams. So we'll take our front and we're going to line it up the center here. With the center of our flat filled seam, we'll have a notch for the center of the bag. You can also, at this time, you can fold it and double check. Make sure you have the center of the bag, and you can clip it. But don't clip too much. You can make a little clip to mark the center, just to double check that you are putting this flat filled seam in the center of the bag on the bottom. For those of you who do not have a lot of experience sewing around curves, you can start with sewing from the bottom and then sewing around the curve and then sewing up to the top. So we'll start with the easy one first. We'll walk you through it by going from the bottom seam, sewing around the curve and up to the top, and then we'll flip the bag over and go the other direction. This will keep the bag from shifting or sliding. You want to make sure that you line it up here at your throat plate for a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which would be the second line. And if you notice, I didn't pin anything. So what you want to do when you're sewing around this curve is you want to work the 2 layers of fabric independently. So as I'm sewing, I'm only lining up 6 inches at a time. So I'm going to hang on to that, line it up, sew to here, and then line up around my curve. I'll stop and I'm only going to sew this much. I'm only going to line up the fabric about 2, maybe 1.5 inches in front of me. And this is where, if you want, you can walk the machine around the corner. And remember, keeping your fabrics or working your fabrics independently. To do the other side, you'll flip it over, have the side panel on the bottom, and you can overlap it. And again, lining up 6 inches, I'm going to stop. When I get to my curve, what I'll do is line up 1 inch at a time, work my fabrics independently. and ease it around the corner. That's the first way of assembling or applying the side panel to the front of the bag. The next way that you can do it, if you have more experience as a sewer, you are going to sew the seam. You can sew the seam from side to side. There are notches marked on these pieces. So we'll start at one of the top notches and then line up the notches as we go around the bag. We're going to take the parts that we assembled last time and we will line them up with our shoulder or with our side and the rest of the bag. We want to make sure that the notches match here at the bottom and that you have notches up here at the top too. So you want to make sure where we clipped our corner last time that it lines up with the notch here. So you want to make sure that lines up and we can start at that point. Again, 1/2 inch seam allowance. You do want to back tack this seam, a few stitches up at the top. And then again, we're going to make sure we work our fabric separately. We're going to line up a few inches at a time. And make sure when you get to the corner that there's nothing pulling on the bag. That your bag, this bag, is free to slide around and you're free to ease in the curve. Again, you can walk it, line up a few inches at a time or even a 1/2 inch at a time. Walk it around the corner. Then you want to make sure that this lines up down at the bottom. When you lift the presser foot and you're adjusting You want to make sure your needle is down. When you get up to the top, you want to make sure that your notches match, so that it matches up at the top here. When you're done, the seams on the other side for the corners from the other side should be smooth. There shouldn't be any puckers in it. If you do have puckers, you can rip and then re-ease your corners. To finish these seams off, we'll be using an overlock machine. Now that we've moved to the overlock machine, we're going to overlock our seam to cover the raw edges. But before we get started, we're going to fold the flap to the inside of the bag along with the zippered pocket, and you're going to want to keep the bag inside out. And before we start, you want to make sure you clip the corners here, and we'll start at the top, and we're going to go all the way around the bottom and up to the other side. We're using 3-thread marrow stitch, and when you're using the overlock and it's threaded with 3 cones, you want to make sure there's only 1 needle. Want to make sure the flap is out of the way on the other side. Now you'll flip the bag over. And if you're having trouble getting into the top, what you can do is start it off at an angle, and then as you're sewing, slowly turn it in. Now that we've overlocked our edges to our side panel, we want to go back to the single needle machine. Now we're back to our single needle machine or our straight stitch machine. It's time to assemble our strap. You'll find 1.5 inches by 50, 52-inch web, tri-glide, and 2 1.5 retainers or common loops. The first step we're going to do is we'll take one end of our 1.5 inch web, thread it through our tri-glide, turn it over, and we're going to fold this 1.5 inches like this. We're going to fold it twice, 1.5 inches, and you're going to box tack. By box tacking, what we're going to do is we're going to sew a square with an X through it. So I'm going to start up at the top end. I'm going to sew to the other side. And then I'm going to sew along one of the edges. And when I get down to the bottom where it's folded, I'm going to turn it around and sew my first diagonal. And then I'm going to sew up to the corner. Remember to hold, or when you've raised your presser foot, hold the needle down so you don't lose your place. I'm going to sew down to the other side, to the fold, and then I'm going to sew my second diagonal. Okay, and then I'll come across and I can go down one of the other sides. And then you do want to sew across the bottom. And this makes a box tack. That would be our first box tack. We're going to take the web, we're going to thread it through one of the retainers, thread one end through the retainer. I'm going to go through the top of the tri-glide. This makes the assembly adjustable. So I can pull this and then my strap is adjustable. The final step in adjusting or assembling the strap would be to thread the last end through the last common loop. You want to fold it over twice and you want to have about 1.5 inches fold. And then we'll start with our box tack. this finishes your strap assembly. The next step would be to finish the lining, the little lining pieces for the side panels. These are sewn onto the top of the bag at the sides here. And notice I still have the bag inside out. So what I'm going to do is line up the panels with the right sides together, and I can start on either side up here at the top. You want a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now I'm not going to sew all the way down to the bottom of the lining piece. I'm actually going to turn up the bottom a 1/2 inch where it meets the top of the bag, and just sew to the top of the bag at the end of the fold and back tack. You'll sew both sides. Don't sew across the top. When the lining piece is put together, you're going to turn it . And then we'll stitch the bottom section down. You can tuck in the overlock threads . Now you'll do the other side the same way and turn the bag inside, or turn the bag right side out. And when having both side linings on like this, the next part to finish the bag would be to sew the retainer or sew the strap onto the retainer. So you'll thread this through the retainer. You can turn it, fold it down, and then you'd flatten it out. Make sure it's laying flat. You want to sew across the bottom first where the fold is. Now on this one you can sew across first, and then it would be a good idea to come back around, and you can do this by pivoting everything through and then sewing forward a second time. Follow the same steps for the other side. Then this would complete the strap assembly and finish the shoulder bag assembly for FD54. Thank you.